we're engaged in this kind of conversation and that you're deeply engaged in this kind of work, Elena. So what you're saying is, not only in the workplace, but at home and our well-being there, all of these obviously intersect. You made a comment earlier about the 85,000 hours of our lives at work. I mean, that's an astounding amount of time. When we think about just the day, just one day, we spend, 8 to 10 hours of our waking time at work, and most of the rest of that is sleeping or getting up and getting ready to go to work, and just how all of these things are so intimately connected. Can you tell us about, in the book that you're working on, Passionality, how might we use the research that you have told us about, have shared with us? How can we use this in our home life, for example? I mean, what would be a practical application of what you're talking about?
Well, I think the first thing that I hope this book leaves people with is permission to be who they are. If there is nothing else they get out of it, it's really okay to be who you are unapologetically and to pursue things that resonate with you and give you a sense of purpose. That is not a self-indulgent exercise. It's actually critical to your well-being. It's critical to the well-being of your family. And I think it's critical to the planet. I'd much rather we had, a world full of people that were loving what they're doing and loving the way in which they're expressing themselves and contributing than the opposite. In terms of, what can this book help you do, I think what it will help people understand is how to navigate the three most important relationships that they have in their lives. The relationship that they have with themselves, number one, is a really important relationship. There are conversations going on in our heads all the time about ourselves. There are judgments that we're making or not making about ourselves all the time. And understanding your passions, I think, helps individuals understand why I'm hearing certain things that I'm hearing in my mind about myself, and how do I want to respond to that, to those discussions that I'm having with myself, and why are there certain situations that I find myself in that really seem to be ones that make my heart sing, and others that are so negative to me. Understanding your passions gives you a lot of insight into that. For example, if I'm somebody who is a processor archetype, and I'm very analytical, and I like structure, and I really don't like chaos, when I'm in situations that are chaotic and where it seems like people don't know what they're doing, I'm uncomfortable. I feel like things are out of control. It's not going to work for me. I need to understand that about myself and why I feel that way. When I think about the relationships that I have with others, people that I love, my friends, my loved ones, folks that I'm closest to, understanding my passions helps me to understand how I'm impacting them in the relationship that I have with them. How are they perhaps seeing me based on these passions? And are there perceptions about me that might be based on the passions that I have that I might want to clarify with them so that we are interfacing with one another more effectively? And then when I think about the relationship that I have with my work, how is it that I want to bring those passions to the job that I am in? Or how do I want those passions to shape the job I choose to pursue so that I'm not maybe chasing after a career because my parents told me I should do this or because it's something I've always done, and instead I'm choosing a career or a path for myself that I know is aligned with my skills but also will have provide me with an outlet for my passions. And I want them to understand they have permission to think that way and to pursue that, and a right to do it.
And a right, permission and a right. I know when we were talking about this, when we were just discussing your work, you talked about a GPS system. It's kind of like a guidance system to help you navigate these three important relationships.
And that's exactly what it is, because if we boil this down to its essence, our passions are our identity. We don't have to look for an identity anywhere else, and it's an identity that can't be taken away from us. and we all have a number of different labels that we identify ourselves with, for male or female or other. If we're a suburbanite or someone who's living out in the country or a city dweller, are we wealthy or not? We have all of these different labels. Are we a father or a mother? Are we practicing one religion versus another or none at all? And we get burdened by these labels, and sometimes we get very attached to them. Like the labels that we have through our work, for example. What title do we have, or what company do we work for? And sometimes when those things are taken away for whatever reason, company closes, there's a downsizing, relationship with someone ends, we run the risk, if that's how we identify ourselves, of feeling this incredible sense of loss. Of now what?
I love that you're saying that this is really a distillation. As you know, I show up in a lot of different contexts, and one of the places I show up is as an educator. And my students, my graduate students, are always talking about these different identities, and I'm going like, those are not your identities.
Yeah, exactly.
They're labels, like you said,
yes.
And they're things that we almost have a fixation about.
Yes.
But when you talk about your work and passion and purpose, and that really those two things interlinked are really the essence, the core of who we are, and the other things that we ascribe to ourselves are not that. They're labels that we have taken on.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love it how you have simplified, not made it simplistic, but really simplified and distilled the essence of passion and purpose.
And it's, Gloria, it's so important. I have had the privilege of meeting many wonderful people, many wonderful leaders, many wonderful individuals. I've also had the opportunity to work inside a large multinational organization, which is basically a microcosm of the larger world.
Yes.
And I have had the misfortune, I'll call it that. Maybe it's fortunate that I saw it, but it was a misfortune for another individual, of watching someone become so attached to an external label that they were devastated when it was taken away. I remember working in an HR position, and we'd made a decision about appointing from a selection of candidates someone to a vice president's position. There were several people in the succession plan, and a decision was made that we were going to give it to person X. And the individuals who were under consideration were told about the decision on a Friday afternoon, as I recollect. We had planned to announce it to the rest of the organization, on, I think, that following Monday. This individual who did not receive the promotion to that role, who I believe thought he would, went home that weekend, walked out into the shed in his backyard, the gardening shed, and blew his brains out because he did not get that job.
Yeah.
So for him, his identity was so tied up in this job, this title, this organization, that I can't imagine the devastation he felt to make that decision, that was the only way to stop the pain.
Yes.
And when people don't know who they are, they're not connected to the deeper identity that we've been talking about today, the risk is high that we will have some very, very painful experiences.
Well, and as work becomes more and more central to our lives, as more people have access to work, in our culture in the United States, not everyone, but certainly a majority, we can enter in this conversation about work, and more internationally, work will become the focus of our lives. So what you have uncovered in your research, Elena, and what you're writing about and what you're making available to individuals, I think is just so rich and so important. And I know we're running up against the clock here. And before we wrap up for today, I would love it if you would talk about any projects that you're working on that you would like to make sure that our listeners hear about, anything that you're working connected to this conversation, or anything else.
Well, what I'm intrigued with right now, I'm always intrigued with something. What I'm intrigued with right now is the connection between the research that's being done on relationships, personal, romantic relationships, and how what's being learned there could have an effect on how we look at our relationship with our work. And it's interesting because it's remarkable that there is this connection. There's a theory of self-expansion that a wonderful researcher that I know at Monmouth University in New Jersey is working on. His name is Gary Lewandowski. He's the chair of the Department of Psychology. And I sat down with him just recently to talk about this work. And the theory of self-expansion is really looking at this notion of what it takes to sort of keep these long-lasting relationships. You know, the ones where you hear about people being married for 50 years and still happy, and you know, you wonder, you know, how do you stay with the same person for 50 years? Oh my gosh, you know, and eats the same bowl of cornflakes every day. Can you stand it? But what's interesting about this particular work is that this theory of self-expansion is really saying that those relationships work because each individual is interested in self-expansion. Each individual is interested in growth and in learning. And if they can have those growth and learning experiences together, it's even better. And that is what causes those relationships to be long and rich. Because after a while, some of the romance starts to wane, and some things start to wear off that, you know, used to be maybe sexually exciting to you about that individual. But when that individual continues to learn and grow, and you learn and grow with them, then those relationships are richer.
And so the connection between the romantic relationships and work, this self-expansion notion, can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the relationship with it as it relates to work is that looking for opportunities for self-expansion at work actually helps you fall in love with your job. So things that challenge and stretch you, opportunities to take on new projects, opportunities to learn new things in fields perhaps that you hadn't been exposed to before. Those things are enriching and self-expansion building for you, and in fact help you develop a different relationship with your work. So when we think about it, taking on new challenges at work, rather than being afraid of them, we probably should really lean into them, because they're an opportunity for us to grow and develop personally, and for us to develop a different and closer affection, I'm going to put that in air quotes, affection for our jobs. So
and the benefit to employers, my mind is just running rampant here, but the benefit to employers is obviously the investment that they've made in this particular person. The return on that investment is obviously more robust, and as an HR executive, I'm sure you probably have lots of links to that benefit as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we, as leaders or managers of others, can recognize that the opportunities that we design for people to have enriching and self-expanding developmental experiences at work is growing them, is growing the degree to which they can contribute to the organization, and when we get them in that zone where we're also connecting it to their passions, we are getting discretionary effort that we can never afford to pay for. And that becomes our competitive edge. Passion is the next competitive edge. Organizations that figure that out, that understand the value of the whole person, and bringing that whole person to the role that they ask them to play, all other things being equal, especially in a commoditized industry, all other things being equal, that's the organization that's going to win. Hands down, every time.
Absolutely.
Passion matters.
Yes. Well, thank you, Elena, and I just can't thank you enough for for your passion and your rigorous background that you bring to this. A lot of people talk about passion in the workplace and purpose and all of that, but you bring a rigor to the work